Hello, my name is Jaida, and I'm a senior at Goucher College, double majoring in environmental studies and professional and creative writing, and this project was completed for my senior thesis. I decided to explore the connection between rhetoric and social justice for this project, focusing specifically on Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai and how they utilize parrhesiastic resistance. Parrhesia is the rhetorical act of speaking truth to power, even when doing so is risky or dangerous to the speaker. While parrhesia can challenge and resist power, it is important to understand that parrhesia is often required for marginalized people to speak out at all, and because of this, there is a need to understand how parrhesia works in certain situations to more effectively enact it. I developed 3 research questions at the beginning of this project, which are 1. How have Greta Thunberg and Malala Yousafzai used parrhesia in their activism to give a voice to silenced people and problems that have historically been overlooked? 2. How do these activists exemplify parrhesiastic resistance through transnational feminist perspectives? And then lastly, 3. How can parrhesia be used to promote social justice and challenge power structures across transnational borders? I used a theoretical framework for this research and analyzed Thunberg's and Yousafzai's speeches through an analysis of the rhetorical situation. In my literature review, I looked at 3 ideas that connect to my research, and kind of going through these ideas, the most important thing to know about transnational feminist perspectives or theory is that it seeks to destabilize ideas that women from across the globe share the same experiences, oppressions, and forms of exploitation and privileges, and explores different ways of conceptualizing agency. Whistleblowing, by definition, is the reporting of wrongdoing by a person who has reasonable grounds to believe that the information reported is true. While Thunberg and Yousafzai are not necessarily considered whistleblowers in the traditional sense, there is an interesting connection between whistleblowing and parrhesiastic speech. And then lastly, parrhesiastic resistance shows that there is a place of courage and personal commitment in politics. Going into the speeches now, for context, Thunberg's 2019 UN Climate Action Summit speech was focused on telling world leaders that she was watching them as they failed to act on climate change. The ethos of this situation is opposite of how it's typically constructed, as Thunberg's only concession to the audience is that she chooses to believe that they are ignorant rather than evil for failing to act. The exigence is the lack of action and responsibility taken by world leaders, the impending problem of climate change, and a fear of the future for young people. The audience are members of the UN, people in power, and those who have the power to be persuaded to implement changes to combat climate change. And then lastly, the constraints include Thunberg's age and a generational disconnect between her and her audience, leading to different priorities. In terms of Yousafzai, she was shot by the Taliban on the way home from school for pursuing an education, and then 9 months later, after she recovered, she was invited to speak before the UN. She constructs her ethos by addressing esteemed figures and expressing gratitude to those who supported her recovery. The exigence is the global crisis in access to education, particularly for girls, and the need for global action on the issue, as well as Yousafzai's personal experience of being a victim of the Taliban. The audience, again, is the members of the UN who have the ability to be persuaded to implement change. And then lastly, the constraints are Yousafzai's age, status of a survivor of a violent attack by the Taliban, and the global fight for education and human rights. While there are many similarities between both Thunberg's and Yousafzai's speeches and activism, it is important to understand how their different places in society influenced them to speak up in the face of danger. For Thunberg, her concern for the climate crisis encouraged her to speak up and advocate for climate action. However, for Yousafzai, the experience that led her to that point was deep-rooted in fear and danger that the Taliban brought to her home. Also, Thunberg had the ability to pursue an education, while Yousafzai's right to an education was actively being stripped away from her and others around her. As women, especially both being young at the time of their speeches, both faced hatred and violence in many forms because of their use of parrhesia. Thunberg's UN speech significantly amplified the climate change movement, drawing global attention and inspiring youth activism. Yousafzai's UN speech brought global attention to the plight of girls' education and inspired action for education access and equality worldwide, leading to increased awareness and advocacy efforts. However, parrhesiastic resistance was at the heart of both political speeches because very few things are more dangerous in societies than speaking out and disclosing certain truths that aren't easy to address. In conclusion, parrhesiastic resistance directly confronts injustice even when it's risky and expresses oppression and fosters social change.